My family plotted to steal control of my company, so I gathered everything, and what I said in court made them lose control. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and my family's always been close-knit, but in a way that, looking back, might have been too close. You know, the kind of family where everyone knows each other's business, and somehow it's always about helping each other out? My parents made it clear they expected me to step up whenever they needed support, especially financially. They'd frame it like I was their rock, the dependable one, and I didn't question it much until recently. Now, my sister is the golden child. She's always been treated like she could do no wrong, and while I tried not to let it bother me, it did. She'd get into little messes, credit card debt, bad investments, and my parents would cover it up or excuse it. Meanwhile, whenever they needed help, I was the one they came to. I even helped pay off some of her previous debts, though it wasn't something I wanted to do. I figured it was just what families did. Things took a turn when I noticed my credit score had tanked seemingly out of nowhere. I'd been careful with my finances, making sure I wasn't missing payments on anything. I was genuinely confused, so I dug into my credit report, trying to figure out what was going on. That's when I saw it, a loan I'd never taken out. It was massive, and the details didn't match anything I'd ever signed up for. Panic set in. I spent hours going over everything, and eventually I realized someone had taken out the loan in my name. I pieced things together bit by bit, realizing that the only people who could have accessed the information needed to take out that loan were my parents. When I confronted them, they didn't deny it. They just sat there, looking at me like I'd accused them of stealing a cookie or something. My dad even laughed, saying they did it for the family and that I should understand. According to him, they were helping my sister with some emergency expenses, and since we were all family, they didn't think it'd be a big deal. They were acting like they'd borrowed a few bucks for gas, not taken out a huge loan in my name. I tried explaining how badly this could mess things up for me, but they brushed it off, saying they'd figure it out. They kept pushing this narrative that it was a loving gesture, helping my sister out. My anger kept growing, but they didn't seem to grasp the seriousness of what they'd done, or maybe they just didn't care. I tried talking to other family members, hoping someone might see my side and help me reason with my parents. That didn't go anywhere. Most of them sided with my parents, saying that family comes first and it wasn't that big of a deal. They kept repeating the same lines, almost like they'd all rehearsed it. It felt like I was up against everyone I'd ever trusted. Frustrated, I started researching my options. I'd never been a confrontational person, especially with family, but I couldn't just ignore what they'd done. I learned that what they'd done was legal identity theft, plain and simple. My parents had banked on me not knowing that or not wanting to go through with any legal action. They assumed I'd just let it go, like always. When I brought up legal consequences, they laughed it off. My mom even said, "You'd never do that to us," as if I owed them blind loyalty, no matter what. My sister, on the other hand, acted like I was the problem. She didn't see any issue, almost like she was entitled to anything and everything from me. She said something along the lines of, "You wouldn't even have what you do if it weren't for all the sacrifices we made." That one hit hard. They were acting like I owed them my life. It was the turning point. I realized they weren't going to change or see reason. They saw me as a resource, not a person. So I made the decision to consult a lawyer. When my family found out, they were shocked, almost offended. My parents kept messaging, calling, trying to guilt-trip me, saying I was tearing the family apart and acting dramatic. My sister even hinted that she'd be ruined if I went through with it, as if I should keep this loan on my record to protect her. My friends were the only ones who actually seemed to understand. They kept telling me to go through with it, to stand up for myself and not let my family walk all over me. Their support was the only thing keeping me sane, honestly. I'd never gone up against my family like this, and the guilt was crushing, but the anger outweighed it. Eventually, I told my parents I was giving them a chance to pay back the loan quietly and without dragging this through the courts. They didn't even consider it. They thought I was bluffing, saying I'd come around. But I'd had enough. I decided to move forward with the lawsuit, even though it meant cutting myself off from them. As expected, they weren't happy. They stopped talking to me completely, acting as if I was the one who'd wronged them. I decided to post about it on Reddit, hoping for advice or at least some reassurance that I wasn't insane for wanting to hold my family accountable. Part of me still felt guilty, but I couldn't just stand by while they ruined my future to cover my sister's mistakes. So, here I am, standing on the edge of one of the hardest decisions I've ever had to make, about to face the fallout from this family mess. After making the decision to go forward with a lawsuit, I filed the legal paperwork. It felt unreal, handing over the documents that would officially serve my own parents, but it was done. They didn't take it well, as I expected. When my parents got the papers, their reaction was classic. They acted completely blindsided, as if this whole thing came out of nowhere. My mom called sounding hurt, saying she had no idea I'd actually go through with it. My dad's tone was more disbelief. Like he was genuinely shocked I'd do this to the family. They kept saying they thought I was bluffing, that they assumed I'd just calm down. But there was no more bluffing, and I wasn't about to calm down after they'd taken out a loan in my name without a single ounce of remorse. It didn't take long for the family group chat to light up. At first, it was just my parents, but then my aunts, uncles, and even cousins started chiming in. I was getting bombarded with messages, all saying I was selfish for taking things this far. Everyone had an opinion, and somehow, none of them saw it my way. I'd gone from dependable to ungrateful overnight, apparently. The messages kept pouring in, accusing me of tearing the family apart over a misunderstanding. As if the group chat wasn't enough, my parents started messaging me individually, pulling out every card they could think of, guilt trips, emotional blackmail, you name it. They'd write things like, "This is breaking our hearts," or "You're choosing money over family." My mom even tried to remind me of the sacrifices they'd made for me, saying they'd always put me first, which couldn't have felt further from the truth. On top of all that, my credit score kept taking a hit. Every time I checked, it seemed to drop a little more. The loan in my name was still unpaid, and the interest was piling up. I was worried about how long this would go on, but there was no way I was going to back down just to save my credit score. It was about more than that. Then the phone calls started coming in from extended family. People I hadn't spoken to in months, maybe even years. I could tell they'd all been talking, and they had this rehearsed script, like they were a united front. They'd call to check in, but then turn it into a lecture about family loyalty and how I should just forgive and forget. According to them, family came first, no matter what. But it felt like family only meant something when it benefited my parents or sister. While my family was piling on, my friends were the only ones really supporting me. They kept reminding me why I was doing this and encouraging me not to let my family's manipulation get to me. I don't think I would have stayed sane without them. Things took another turn when my sister started reaching out. She was saying she'd be destroyed financially if I went through with the lawsuit, that I'd ruin her life over a stupid mistake. She tried making it sound like I was being unreasonable, like I was the one causing her all this pain. But every word out of her mouth just made it more obvious that she felt entitled to my support, like it was my job to clean up her messes. And then came the social media fallout. My family wasn't content with just the family group chat and personal messages. They decided to air everything online, posting vague statuses about being betrayed by those closest to you and how money changes people. They painted me as the greedy, ungrateful son, conveniently leaving out the part where they took out a huge loan in my name without permission. They knew exactly what they were doing, trying to paint themselves as the victims. All the drama online and within my family made it hard to stay focused, but my lawyer was a big help. He reassured me that I had a solid case and reminded me that the law was on my side. He went over my rights, the next steps, and what to expect. He was calm and professional, which helped steady me. I needed that reassurance, especially since my family was acting like I was completely in the wrong. My parents tried one last move to get me to drop the case, a private family meeting. They reached out, saying we could just talk it over like family. They made it sound like it'd all be settled if I just showed up, apologized, and dropped everything. I told them I'd only come if they committed to paying back the loan. No dodging, no misunderstandings. They refused. After that, I knew I needed to block them, at least temporarily. I'd given them every chance, and every time, they'd just try to manipulate me back into dropping it. So, I blocked their numbers and cut off all the noise. The silence was almost a relief, even though part of me still felt guilty. But I had to focus on the case, and I couldn't keep letting them mess with my head. As the court date drew closer, my family's tactics ramped up. It was almost as if they thought that by turning up the pressure, I'd cave and drop the case. One of their first moves was starting a rumor campaign. I'd hear from mutual friends and distant relatives that they were saying things about me. Things that weren't just untrue, but downright bizarre. Stories about me being ungrateful, rumors that I was only doing this because I was greedy, or that I'd always had a rebellious streak. They were spinning a whole narrative that made me look like the black sheep trying to ruin my own family out of spite. My parents even tried sending me apologies, but it was clear they weren't genuine. They'd send long, emotional messages about how much they loved me and wanted to keep the family together, but the underlying message was always the same. If I dropped the case, we could all move past this unfortunate misunderstanding. The words sounded hollow, like they'd rehearsed them, and there wasn't a single acknowledgement of what they'd done or any offer to fix it. They just wanted me to let it go and pretend it never happened. Then things escalated. I got a letter from their lawyer saying they were filing a countersuit against me. In their claim, they argued that I owed them for raising me for all the years of sacrifices. The countersuit was built on this idea that I was somehow in debt to them for my entire existence. It was ridiculous, but I could see the strategy. They wanted to scare me into backing down by threatening a drawn-out legal battle. Word of the countersuit spread, and relatives who'd been quietly supporting me started distancing themselves. I guess they didn't want to be caught in the middle of what was quickly turning into a massive family feud. Some stopped answering my calls. Others outright told me they didn't want to be involved. It felt like my parents were winning, managing to isolate me from the family one person at a time. Meanwhile, my sister reached out again. She sent this long message, detailing all the ways she'd suffer if I went through with the lawsuit. She painted a picture of herself as the victim, saying she'd be financially ruined, that I was heartless for dragging her into this, and that she didn't deserve to have her life destroyed. She conveniently left out the part where she'd benefited from the loan taken out in my name. I couldn't help but see her message as another attempt to make me feel guilty. Despite everything, my lawyer and I kept moving forward. We focused on gathering as much evidence as possible. The more we dug, the more financial manipulation we uncovered, transactions, forged signatures, all sorts of red flags that painted a clear picture of my parents' behavior. It felt good to have something concrete, proof that showed I wasn't crazy for taking this stand. While all this was happening, my family ramped up their social media campaign. They posted vague but obvious updates, saying things like, "Some people betray their own blood for money," or "When you give someone everything and they throw it back in your face." They were fishing for sympathy, and it worked. Friends and extended family members who didn't know the whole story would comment, sending their support and saying things like, "Stay strong, family is all that matters." They were building a whole public image of themselves as the victims, and I was the ungrateful son tearing the family apart. Out of nowhere, I got a message from an estranged uncle I hadn't spoken to in years. He said he'd heard what was going on and that he wanted to help. He told me he'd seen similar behavior from my parents years ago, which was one of the reasons he distanced himself from the family. He offered to testify on my behalf, saying he could provide context about their long-standing manipulation tactics. It was a surprising twist, but I appreciated it, especially since most of my family had abandoned me. In the middle of all this, my parents tried one last offer. They said they'd pay back a small fraction of the loan if I agreed to drop the lawsuit. They framed it as a gesture of goodwill, as if throwing a few dollars my way would make up for everything. My lawyer advised against it, reminding me that we had a strong case. It felt like a trap, a way to make me back down just enough for them to keep a hold over me. I refused the offer without a second thought. A few days later, I ran into my family at a local store. I hadn't expected it, and the situation quickly turned ugly. They didn't hold back, accusing me of abandoning them in their time of need. My dad got heated, his voice loud enough to draw attention, telling me that I was betraying everything they'd done for me. My mom looked on, saying I was the reason the family was falling apart. The whole thing was chaotic, and I left as quickly as I could. The confrontation rattled me, but it only strengthened my resolve. After that, I received another letter from their lawyer, a more intimidating one this time. It listed all the potential consequences if I continued with the case, suggesting that things could get messy and drawn out. I knew it was another scare tactic, but seeing it in writing made everything feel heavier, like the full weight of what I was up against was bearing down. Despite everything, I couldn't turn back now. I'd come this far, and I wasn't going to let their manipulation win. The first court appearance was tense. I was sitting across the room from my parents, who looked surprisingly put together, given the chaos they'd been stirring. My lawyer was calm and organized, and seeing the stack of paperwork he had in front of him was oddly comforting. As we got started, he laid out the case methodically, presenting evidence of the loan fraud and identity theft. He showed copies of documents that had been signed without my consent, bringing out every detail that proved my parents had crossed a line. Watching him work made it clear we were fully prepared. As my lawyer presented our case, the depth of the situation started to unfold in a way that was hard to ignore. My parents' lawyer tried to claim that the loan had been for family expenses, but our evidence told a different story. My lawyer showed documents that exposed the actual purpose of the loan, which had nothing to do with family necessities. It was all to cover my sister's personal debts, and that fact came across clearly in black and white. The turning point came when my uncle, the one who'd reached out after hearing about the case, took the stand. I hadn't known what he'd say, only that he had distanced himself from the family years ago for similar reasons. He talked about my parents' long history of financial manipulation, how they'd taken advantage of others in the family, often guilt-tripping or even coercing them into lending money they'd never see again. His testimony gave context to my actions and showed the judge that my decision to sue wasn't out of nowhere. The courtroom was silent, everyone listening intently to every word. Then came my sister's turn. She'd always kept a certain composure, especially when trying to convince me to drop the case, but under questioning, she started to crack. When asked about her financial involvement and whether she was aware of the loan taken out in my name, her answers wavered, her voice shook, and she struggled to respond coherently. Eventually, it became clear that she knew the loan was under my name and that she'd actively gone along with it. The more she talked, the more everyone could see how deep she was in this mess too. My parents looked genuinely shocked that I'd actually gone through with it this far, as if they'd expected me to drop everything once things got serious. I could see their disbelief growing every time another piece of evidence was presented. When my lawyer asked them to respond to the documents and testimony, they looked defensive, trying to save face, but it was clear they hadn't prepared for this level of scrutiny. The judge listened to everything carefully, and I could tell she wasn't buying their defense. My parents tried to play the "we're just a family in need" card, painting themselves as the ones trying to hold the family together, but it wasn't working. The judge asked pointed questions, pressing them about why they hadn't considered other ways to address the debts instead of taking out a loan under my name. My parents stumbled through their answers, their confidence visibly fading. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. I explained the emotional toll of finding out that the people I trusted most had not only betrayed me, but had continued to manipulate and guilt-trip me when I tried to stand up for myself. I didn't go into dramatic details, just laid out the facts of how long this behavior had been going on and how it had finally reached a breaking point. My parents' lawyer tried a few aggressive tactics during cross-examination, trying to portray me as the rebellious son who didn't appreciate family loyalty, but my lawyer countered every claim smoothly, turning the focus back to the core issue, the loan taken out without my permission, the lack of remorse, and the trail of manipulation. At one point, my parents started arguing with each other openly. My dad blamed my mom for letting it get this far, while my mom shot back, saying she'd done it for the family. They were practically shouting, and the judge had to intervene to get things back on track. Watching them argue in front of the judge was embarrassing, and I could tell it didn't help their case. It was like the whole courtroom could see the dysfunction they'd tried so hard to hide. After the hearing ended, I started getting messages from people who'd been following the story on social media. Some were people I didn't even know, but they reached out, saying they'd been in similar situations or just wanted to show support. It was surreal, but it also felt like validation from people who understood what it was like to deal with manipulative family members. The financial disclosures were the final blow. My parents had to reveal the extent of their debts and poor financial decisions, and even I was shocked by the numbers. I'd had no idea how far in over their heads they were. The court documents showed they'd been struggling for years but had hidden it from me, choosing to use my credit as a solution rather than face their problems head-on. Seeing it all laid out made it impossible for them to keep pretending they were blameless. The judge adjourned, setting another date to go over additional evidence, and I left the courtroom feeling like we'd made progress. It wasn't over, but we'd managed to expose so much already. That evening, I received a message from my parents. No apologies, just a straightforward disownment, telling me that I was no longer part of the family. It felt harsh, but it was also freeing in a way. They'd finally shown their true colors. With the case heading toward a decision, I thought things would start to settle. Instead, my parents' lawyer reached out with a surprise. They were offering a settlement. At first, it seemed like they were ready to finally take responsibility, but when I went through the terms, it became clear this was just another manipulation. The settlement was structured so that, technically, they would repay a portion of the loan, but the majority of it would still be unpaid, left to me to cover. Even worse, the conditions focused heavily on supporting my sister, requiring that a portion of the settlement be funneled toward her ongoing debts. The offer wasn't a solution, it was a way to get me to back off without actually solving anything. Attached to the settlement offer was a letter from my parents, a long, drawn-out apology that felt hollow. They acknowledged the hurt this situation had caused, saying that they only did what they did out of love for the family. But it was clear they still didn't understand, or didn't want to understand, the extent of the damage they'd caused. The words felt empty, like they were saying just enough to cover their tracks. There was no real accountability, no admission that what they'd done was outright wrong. I brought everything to my lawyer. He took one look at the terms and immediately advised against accepting it. According to him, the settlement was legally flimsy and heavily skewed in their favor. He pointed out that if I signed it, I'd be locked into future obligations that would likely lead to even more financial strain. The whole thing was a trap, a way to make me drop the lawsuit without resolving the core issue. Despite my lawyer's advice, the guilt started creeping back. They were my parents, after all. Part of me wondered if I was being too harsh, if maybe this was their attempt at making amends, even if it was misguided. But every time I tried to convince myself to give in, I'd remember the relentless manipulation, the lies, and how they tried to ruin my reputation instead of taking responsibility. My friends and Reddit followers were firm in their support. I posted an update on the settlement offer, explaining the details and asking for advice. The responses were overwhelming, with countless people urging me not to give in. They pointed out that my parents hadn't changed. They were just trying a new tactic to control the situation. The support helped me see the offer for what it really was. As expected, my parents didn't take my refusal well. They escalated things quickly, telling family members I was unforgiving and heartless for not wanting to settle. They began posting even more on social media, sharing vague statements about how difficult it was to watch their own child destroy the family for money. The guilt trips went public, and people who didn't know the whole story started commenting in their favor, offering sympathy and even taking jabs at me indirectly. Ignoring it was hard, but I knew that I had to keep going. The court date was still approaching, and this offer felt like a desperate attempt on their part to avoid the trial. They could sense they were losing, and they were scrambling for any way out. Instead of backing down, I asked my lawyer to prepare for a full trial. There was no more middle ground here. Around that time, an unexpected ally reached out, a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. She'd been aware of the family dynamics but had kept her distance, knowing how manipulative my parents could be. When she heard what was happening, she called to offer her support. She told me stories I hadn't heard before, about how my parents had pulled similar stunts with other family members, borrowing money and never paying it back, relying on guilt and manipulation to keep people quiet. She said she wished she'd spoken up sooner but had been afraid of the backlash. Her support gave me strength, knowing I wasn't alone in this, that others had seen the same behavior. Then, as if sensing that I was fully committed to going to trial, my parents sent one last message. It was a long, emotional letter, saying they couldn't believe I was willing to destroy the family over a misunderstanding. They painted themselves as the victims again, making one final plea for me to come to my senses and put the family first. It was hard to read, but it was clear that this wasn't about family. It was about control. I made my decision. I wasn't going to let guilt dictate my actions. I told my lawyer to move forward with full preparations for trial, and he got to work, gathering everything we needed. He helped me understand what to expect and walked me through the process so that I felt fully prepared for whatever they'd throw at me. The weight of the situation was heavy, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace about standing up for myself. The final hearing came faster than I'd expected. I sat in the courtroom, facing my parents across the room. The months of manipulation, emotional blackmail, and legal battles had all led to this moment. My lawyer was calm, quietly reviewing our case notes one last time. My parents looked tense, as if they knew that their last-ditch settlement offer and social media theatrics hadn't done the trick. The judge entered, signaling the beginning of the end of this long ordeal. My lawyer went over our evidence clearly and concisely, the documents showing the loan taken out in my name without consent, the records of financial misuse, and the testimonies that highlighted my parents' pattern of manipulation. The judge listened intently, taking in every piece of evidence. After my lawyer presented our side, my parents' lawyer tried once more to frame the situation as a family misunderstanding. He emphasized that they had only wanted to support my sister and had never intended to cause me harm. But there was little they could say that hadn't already been picked apart by our evidence. It was clear to everyone in that room that this wasn't some innocent mistake. Finally, the judge looked up and delivered the ruling. She declared in my favor, confirming that the loan had been taken out fraudulently and ordering my parents to repay the full amount. The debt would no longer be tied to me, and I would be free from the financial burden they had placed on my shoulders. The judge also imposed minor penalties on them for the fraud, a clear message that their actions had legal consequences beyond our family drama. The moment the ruling was made, my parents lost their composure. My dad's face was red with anger, and my mom looked like she was on the verge of tears. Right there in the courtroom, they disowned me, announcing to anyone who would listen that I was no longer part of their family. My dad even shouted that I had destroyed the family over money, ignoring the fact that they were the ones who'd put us in this situation in the first place. My sister, sitting with them, was even more volatile. She stood up and started blaming me for her financial ruin, accusing me of being selfish and cruel for not supporting her. The irony of her words wasn't lost on me, but I stayed silent, watching as they all stormed out of the courtroom, leaving me behind. With them gone, the relief settled in. The debt was no longer mine to carry, and my financial record would finally be clear. My lawyer congratulated me, assuring me that this ruling would put an end to the entire ordeal. He also explained that, due to the ruling, if my parents tried to appeal, it would likely be dismissed, given the strong evidence we had presented. They would have little ground to stand on. As news of the court's decision spread, I received messages from extended family members who hadn't reached out in years. A few offered belated apologies, saying they hadn't known the full extent of what had happened and that they regretted believing my parents' side of the story. It was nice to have their understanding, but at this point, I realized I didn't need anyone's validation to move forward. This journey had taught me more about self-reliance than I ever imagined. Back in my own world, things started to fall into place. I'd been working hard at my job, and not long after the case ended, I received a promotion. It felt symbolic, a sign that I was finally stepping into a new phase of life. My friends, who'd stood by me through everything, celebrated with me, and I realized that I'd built a support network stronger than the family I'd left behind. With my finances restored, I started making plans for a fresh start. Moving to a new city sounded appealing, a chance to leave behind the memories of this turbulent chapter and focus on my future. I hadn't made any decisions yet, but the freedom to choose felt liberating. I was no longer bound by the manipulations and expectations of my family. My parents did make one last attempt at retaliation by filing an appeal, but as expected, it was dismissed almost immediately. The court found no grounds to overturn the decision, and they were forced to start repaying the loan themselves. This last effort seemed desperate, a final attempt to control the narrative, but it failed, just like all their previous schemes. In the days that followed, I took time to reflect on everything that had happened. This experience had been one of the hardest in my life, but it had also been one of the most important. I had stood up for myself, held my ground, and refused to let guilt and manipulation dictate my actions. I'd come out of it stronger, with a clear sense of who I was and what I valued. My family had chosen to disown me, but I knew I wasn't alone. I had friends, supportive colleagues, and an online community that had my back. Most importantly, I had my independence. The journey hadn't been easy, but I wouldn't trade the lessons learned for anything. I was finally free to live my life on my own terms, with the strength to build a future that was truly mine.